Learning Objective 2. And this compares two ways to present income statements. One is called functional and the other is called contribution income. And they sound similar and you might think that it doesn't matter, but it actually matters quite a bit. One way to think about it is when we look at financial statements for external users, namely GAAP, we're looking at costs that are organized by function. Examples being, what are your manufacturing costs or what are your selling and administrative costs? And gross margin is the result of taking revenue minus your cost of goods sold. And that tells you how much money did you make for every dollar of sales and revenues, or how much do you make per unit of sales. And we assume that the costs that we have for a product are variable, when in fact that's not true. In every manufacturing cost, there are elements that are variable, such as the raw material and the direct labor, but there's also some fixed costs that get added in legitimately to establish your cost to make a particular product. Costs such as the depreciation on your equipment or the rent you pay for the factory. These are fixed costs that somehow find their way into the product costs. Again, for good reason, because we want to measure how much money do we make all in, right? All the costs in making a product, what does it cost you? And then compare that to our selling price to see if we're making profit or not. So that's kind of the main objective, as you know, from GAAP-based financial statements. Hopping over to the contribution income statement, these look at very much breaking out along variable and fixed lines. The costs are categorized by fixed or variable, and the top might be varied, the bottom might be fixed, and within variable would be things that you would see in the top of a GAAP income statement. Things like the cost of goods sold, although it would be measured now by the variable components like direct labor or direct material. And there may be some elements that are variable costs that in a GAAP statement would show up on the bottom, but in a contribution income statement, it would show up on the top. Things like the variable royalty needed to be paid to the holder of a patent, or the variable selling costs, such as commissions when we have sales. Those would be in the bottom in the operating expense section under GAAP, but for contribution, it's in the variable costs. And on the bottom, we have fixed. And fixed could, again, be manufacturing fixed costs, like the overhead or rent, or it could be true overhead, like corporate overhead, like the rent or the depreciation for the headquarters building. Let's look at some examples. Functional income statement. This is a company that's called Chilling Time. And the functions are cost of goods sold, and the expenses are selling and administrative costs, and that's what the main categories are. Here we have an example of $10,425 as total sales, total cost of goods sold of $7,802, leading to a gross margin of $2,623. Out of $10,000 in sales, the cost of manufacture is $7,800. Therefore, our gross profit is $2,623. And our gross margin can be determined by taking the gross profit of $2,623 divided by revenue of $10,425. SG&A, or selling and administrative expenses here, $1,623 for a profit of $6. We're going to look at the contribution income approach and then compare them. Keep this in your mind and we'll look at the next slide. All right, contribution income. Notice first the sales are the same. However, the next part changes quite dramatically. Variable costs include product costs like materials and labor, like the variable elements of manufacturing overhead, such as electricity used in the plant, and the selling and administrative expenses, which typically would have been on the bottom of an income statement. If it's variable, we want to lump it with the other variable costs, as it is here. And now notice that we have a subtotal, but that subtotal is not gross profit. It is contribution margin. And what follows from there are the fixed costs. Again, we're not looking at where the costs were, it's just the nature, is it fixed or not. Fixed costs here, by example, are for the manufacturing, say the plant, and also for the selling and administrative. Notice at the very bottom, we have $1,000. One of the applications that we often are asked is, what would happen if sales go up? What would happen if sales went down? And I'm going to show you right now in Excel how the analysis would be different if all we had was functional versus having a contribution income approach to financials. What would happen if we doubled our revenues? And I've just duplicated the slides side by side here so we could see. If we doubled our revenues would double. So that's an easy one, right? 2 times that number. Let me format this. All right, it's $20,850, double the $10,425. And we can go right to the cost of goods sold and say, what if we doubled our cost of goods sold? The gross margin would equal revenues minus the 15 or 5,000. Fixed costs we would assume don't change because they're fixed. So that comes over as the same. So if we take our gross profit and subtract out the selling administrative, we end up with 3,623. So now let's look at the income statement using contribution approach. So sales are the same, the sales times 2, and we get the same number, 20,850. Let's just duplicate that format. Now the variable would also double. So plus that times 2. And our margin is now contribution margin, revenue minus the costs. And the fixed costs, we feel very good that they're fixed, so they're not going to change. And so we end up with contribution margin of 3780. So notice that although the numbers are similar, they're not the same. And the flaw is in functional, we're treating as fixed some of the variable costs, and we're treating as variable some of the fixed costs. And that dilutes our accuracy. When we look at the income statement, by its construction, we separated variable from fixed. So when volume goes up, we know what to change. We only change the variable. And the fixed, we also know what to do there. Don't touch it. It stays the same. This particular measure here, the 3780 versus the 3623, this is more accurate because we looked at every cost, such as direct material, direct labor, manufacturing overhead, and selling administrative. If revenue goes up, these will change. And on the other side, these manufacturing costs and these selling administrative don't change. So we feel very comfortable saying that they don't change because that's how it was put in there by construction, as opposed to a different purpose. The purpose of functional is more measuring the profitability at the product level and then at the company level, but not really the distinction between fixed and variable costs. All right, so that is the first set on contribution versus function.